Welcome, welcome, welcome to Voice, Value, and Validation, a paradigm shift. I've been looking forward to this webinar. I'm excited. We had it scheduled for one day, and then I had to move and do crazy stuff, so we had to reschedule it, and y'all stayed with us. So we are excited to have our amazing presenter here today. So who am I, you may say? I am Dr. Desiree Alexander. Hello, I am the founder, CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting and the deputy director for a nonprofit called APAL. So I'm happy to be here with you today, even though my voice is going out because I was a feature presenter this week and I can hardly speak anymore, but that's okay. We're here. These are all of the different ways that you can contact me. Yay! So let's look at the rest of the webinars that are coming up. Next weekend, we have NFTS in education. If you're like, I don't know about all this AI stuff, I don't know what NFTs are, then you need to come. You need to come and find out. So that will be next weekend. Then we have School Library Optimizing Your Budget in January. I don't have a budget. All right, well, come learn how you can get some money. So let's go ahead and talk about that January 20th. And then we have Up Your Google Game, Google tips, tricks, and time savers to boost your productivity. That is going to be January 27th. And then we have TCEA in Texas. What's up, Texas? So we have TCEA conference coming up. And then this is my schedule so far, but I'm going to have two things to add because, you know, people are still scheduling stuff. So there you go. This is getting a change. And then we have asset-based teaching, changing perceptions to increase student achievement in February. Then we have, this is a paid session for ELA teachers. ELA teachers 20 best technology tools, February 13th and February 27th from BER. Then we have in-class flip, design active learning spaces for student-centered learning, teaching, pass the test. So this is really for you about passing the Texas certification exam. So if you're in Texas, this is one for you. AI for educators. I don't know about all this AI stuff. The robot's going to take over. Well, come learn. Come learn. All right, AI for educators, March 2nd. The keys to successful classroom management on March 9th. Dr. Marlene, who always comes and does all of our SPED classes, is switching it up a little bit and talking about classroom management this time. Whew. I know that was a lot, and we're still scheduling stuff, y'all. So that's just the ones we have scheduled as of now. We always have our self-paced classes going on for SLLA test prep, Google test prep, all that good stuff. You can find all of these at edalex.net/events. And then if you want to tell me what you want to learn in a webinar, or if you want to do a webinar, we have a lot of first-time presenters. We have a lot of national presenters. Like, just come and share your knowledge or tell us what you want to learn at that link. All right, I am so glad we're about to get started because I don't know if you can hear my voice, but it's really about to go out completely. So I'm glad I don't have to talk anymore, but I'm also glad because we can hear Dr. Karen Gray. I met her. I fell in love with everything that she's doing and her personality and her spirit. And I'm just very, very excited. I'm building her up because she deserves to be built up. So very excited to hear her speak today. So we're going to go ahead and get started to learn about voice, value, and validation.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm glad to see my Lafayette people in the house. Thank y'all for stopping in and seeing me today. I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about me. I've been in education for 17 years. I was a classroom teacher, taught grades 4 through 8, went into administration for about 3.5 years, and then worked for a company in New Orleans as their SEL, main SEL person. I got to travel a lot. I got to work with schools in South Chicago. I got to work with schools in Phoenix, Arkansas, North Carolina, and it was an amazing experience for me. Loved it. And so this is year 2 of me venturing out into my own company, Humanity Solutions, where I provide support for school systems with classroom management, student behavior, restorative practices. And so that's a little bit about what I want to share with you today: voice, value, and validation. And hopefully it'll give you a different perspective and help shift your thinking a little bit on student behavior. All right, so I love to be interactive, and I know sometimes people don't always love to share, but hopefully today you'll interact with me just a little bit. I always like to start with a circle question. Circles are something very big in restorative practices. It's a way for us to build relationships, get to know one another, get the conversation started. So the first question, what are some ways that you de-escalate during or after a disagreement or conflict? And I mean you, it doesn't have to be with a student. Your answer can be with family, friends, significant others. What are some ways that you de-escalate whenever you're upset about something? And I have a few that I'll share with you. Somebody said breathing, definitely deep breathing, meditation. I walk away and breathe it out, definitely. What about if you're like in a situation where you can't really walk away? Like what if, you're not in a position to do that? What are some things? Rocking. I definitely am a rocker. I definitely move around a lot. Pace, definitely. Think about it first. Good answers. So some of the ones that I want to share with you today. Why can't I go to my next? God dog it. Okay, there we go. All right. So sometimes I feel like some big ones are isolation and venting. So sometimes you just want to be alone. That would include walking away, having some time to think about it, closing your eyes for a second so you can get your thoughts together. I saw somebody put thinking about it first. I think rephrasing what I heard, that's a very good one. Deep breathing, avoidance. Sometimes I may not be ready to have the conversation, so I might want to avoid it. Venting, I might have a heightened voice. I know that's one for me. Whenever I get, even if I'm not mad, if I'm passionate about something, my voice will heighten. Releasing of energy through physical movement. Now that could look different. Some people might say, exercising might be something that they do when they need to de-escalate. Explaining your side. Like I like to talk it out. Like sometimes I just need somebody to actively listen to me so I can, talk about it, hear myself say it, and then move through it. Mumbling under my breath, talking to yourself. Those are some ways that, sometimes we de-escalate. What about student de-escalating? Like, would it look the same? I would say most of the time it does, but they don't always have access like we do to just walk away, right? So sometimes they might want to leave the classroom. They might want to walk out, stand up in the hall, go somewhere where they feel safe. I've seen students get under desk. I've seen them avoid situations or embarrassment by doing those things, right? They don't want their peers to laugh at them or see them in that state. So they want to escape. Putting a hood on, that's another thing that I think students do. They want to, or put their head down to isolate themselves into what they feel is a safe space. They might want to get out and go speak to a teacher that they have a relationship with. And in that moment, they don't always ask. Sometimes they just walk away. Venting, sometimes they have a heightened voice as well. They yell a little bit. Sometimes they release energy through physical movement. And I'm not talking about jumping jacks. Sometimes they want to kick the desk. Sometimes they want to hit something or throw something down. They want to explain their side sometimes too. And sometimes they mumble under their breath. But I want to ask this question. Thinking about all the things that we just listed, these 8 things that we listed, what normally happens when a student does any of these things? When they leave the classroom, and you can share in the chat or you can unmute. If they walk out of the classroom or they get under their desk, they put their hood on or put their head down, they raise their voice a little bit, they want to explain their side, or they might kick a desk. What do we normally do at that point? They get in trouble. They receive additional consequences or are escalated even more 100%, seen as disrespectful. Sometimes they ask for assistance if they're trained to do that. If that has been modeled for them to do, that works very well. Negative energy is directed at them. The teacher gets defensive and writes a referral. That's 100% correct. But as adults, we're expected to be allowed to vent and de-escalate the way we need to, but why can't we allow kids to do that sometimes? Now, I understand that there are certain parameters with safety that we have to consider. But if we have a plan in place for that student, wouldn't it be better for us to let them calm and de-escalate before we start threatening to write them up, threatening to call home. Like we just have to look at that a little bit different because they're tiny humans. You know, we're human, they're tiny humans. And as adults, I sometimes expect us to have like a little bit better grasp on how to manage emotions, but kids don't always have that grasp. So sometimes we have to remember that they're humans and they need to de-escalate as well. So later on, we'll get into some strategies we can do. So here's some what ifs. Like in thinking about reframing, I want you to think about that word reframing. What do you think about? What comes to mind when you hear the word reframe? Because I want us to get into a mode right now of reframing how we see student behavior. So what if we were able to look at students' behavior separate from who they are? What if we were able to zoom into the actual problem and not see the child as the problem, but instead the problem as the problem? What if we could follow our most challenging student home? What might we see when we got there? Might we see that the problem is bigger than us and it's not personal? I feel like it's hard for us not to take things personal sometimes. Sometimes we get very personal. We think the actions that we see are towards us, and in many, many, many cases, they're not. What if we were less concerned about the power struggle, but more concerned with the actual issue? Like, what would having this do for us if we were able to separate the child from the problem? So let's talk about why we need to shift and why we need to reframe and why we need to start thinking about behavior in a different way. Well, the research suggests that 25% of children will experience at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. 51% of students in public schools live in poverty. 50 to 80% of students who live in poverty experience trauma. Would you guys agree, and you can give me a thumbs up or a yes, no, that we encounter lots of kids with trauma and it affects their behavior? It affects, their behavior on a daily basis. Would you guys agree with that? Absolutely. Someone said it would help us to build better relationships. 100%. 100%. Yes, sometimes it's from home. Very true. So they come to us from these traumatic events. What are some traumatic events, guys, that you think students come to us with? And you guys can either unmute or chat. It's up to you. What are some things, some traumatic events that they come to us with every day from home, especially when we work in high poverty schools? Violence, abuse, neglect, being alone. And yes, you guys can unmute to answer if you would like. Depression. Depression. Tammy, thanks for sharing that word because depression, like I'm so serious and I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but this is, a safe space and having real conversations. Like because I didn't have issues with depressions while I was a classroom teacher and I didn't really know or had experienced mental health or mental illnesses, I didn't really understand what that could look like for a child. So when we looked at their 504 or IEP and we saw depression or anxiety, it was like, what does that even mean? Like, I wasn't sure that that was just something made up. I'm just being honest with y'all. So moving further in my career and now having experienced anxiety to a very high level at the great age of 41, I have a new outlook on mental illness and how that could impact a child. And I think that being trauma informed is a super important thing for teachers now because it's not just on counselors anymore. And I'm sorry,
May,
go ahead, go
may,
ahead.
may I intervene?
100%, Miss Tammy. Thank you.
Hi. So not too long ago I had a student that was living with her mother, then comes to this, to the school to I guess do guardianship. And
Okay.
the grandmother shared with me like that the mom like chose, her partner over, her kids. So she was just trying to
Absolutely.
get her, And the child was acting out really, really bad. I mean, referrals like every other day. She was in, SAC. And so, like the grandmother said, the grandma said, one thing that y'all don't know is what happens at home. So I'm
Yep,
trying to shape her back. I'm trying to get her back because I lost a part of my grandchild, and I know she's
yep.
hurting because she saw things that she wasn't supposed to see. That's all.
100%.
Sorry.
Thank you for sharing that. No, I'm glad you shared it because it's very true. And I just don't think we take the time enough, to figure out what's actually going on. Now, they don't always share everything with us all the time up front. But once we start building those relationships and we create a safe psychological safety, safe spaces in our room, and they trust us, we found out some things that we don't even want to know. So what does having that information do for you? Like, what does Miss Tammy, you just shared what you shared. How did that like shape and mold you for her? Like it does something to have that information. It helps us to create empathy. It helps our responses, be different. That doesn't mean that we don't still hold them accountable whenever they do something. It doesn't mean that at all. And I think some people think that it does. It's not like I'm feeling sorry for you, but it's just like I can respond to you in a more appropriate, empathetic manner. Somebody put in the chat, it builds trust and understanding 100%. And that's what we need to do. And what we know is that kids who come to us who live in poverty and come from trauma, they don't trust as easy. They don't trust us easy at all. Like we have to do and put in work for them to trust us. Super important. So I want you guys to consider this question at the top of the slide. What would happen if you showed up to the doctor for a heart attack, but they treated you for a broken finger? What would happen? You might die. You'll go into cardiac arrest and you might die. You might have some long-term effects because you didn't get treated properly. What does this mean for educators? How can we put this in a perspective for us? Well, all students need care. They all come to us needing some sort of care. And if you believe that kids come to school and you can just teach them all day, I don't know if you're in the right profession, because I've never been able to just show up to school, teach academics, and not deal with any social or emotional issues. That's never been my life. So all students need care, but not every child needs the same care. Students who come from poverty and trauma need differentiated care, or they will not be reached. Somebody said trust is super big. You have to cater to their needs as well, 100%. And you have to cater to the needs appropriately. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on it and move forward. It has to be specific and it has to be intentional to what that student needs. And there's really only one way to do that. And that way is to actually understand what's actually going on with the child. So if I'm not taking the time to do that and I'm just slapping them with a label, and I think someone said that earlier, I'm just calling them BAD, bad, guilty over here too. That's what happens. We don't give appropriate care. So I'm going to share a story right here with you guys, and I want to ask that if you can think of something you can share, we will have time for one or two people to share a story as well. But I want to share a story about when I first started teaching. I started teaching at Alice Boucher in Lafayette. First year teacher, somewhere around 2006, 7. Had basically a kind of a culture shock for me too, because I was raised in a two-parent home, had all my basic needs met for the most part. So I stepped into a classroom where, the school is a high needs school then, and it is still now. So I had a student, her name was Omega. She was 13 years old. I taught 5th grade. She was very, you could see her basic needs what weren't being met for the most part. She was very angry. She had some aggression. She slept a lot in class. But for some reason, she and we were okay. We had a pretty solid relationship. I didn't have too many issues with her snapping on me too much. But we did have to, I had to build with her. So school year just starting. So Fast forward, there was a teacher down the hall who every time the teacher passed by, I don't know if she had her a previous year, but every time the teacher passed by, she would have to say something. We would transition at the same time. So whether it was get off the wall, stand up straight, turn around, she had to say something to the student. And I noticed how it was negatively impacting her. So what I started doing was trying to be a shield, right? I would either position myself to kind of stand where the teacher couldn't really see her, or I would send her in my room, hey, go get my ink pen off the desk, go grab my water, go get my lunchbox. I would send her to run an errand because I knew that it was going to do something to her emotionally. So I tried to shield as much as I could. I was out for a couple of days in October for my birthday. And when I returned, Omega was expelled from school. And I was like, what happened? So the story is the teacher did the same thing she always did. She came down the hall. She told Omega something, but this time, because I wasn't there and there was a sub, she got really close into Omega's face and Omega slapped her. Okay, so Omega's out of school, expelled, and at that time we didn't really hold them in school suspension. They would stay home until the hearing came, and while she was at home, she got hit by a car and died. And we found out that she was pregnant at the time as well. So she had so many things going on. She was prostituting for money. She really did not have a home to go to. So she was semi-homeless. She had a grandmother who was somewhat caring for her, but not really. She often was hungry. So she was running the streets at night, which is why she was sleeping all day. She was angry. She had very aggressive behavior. And although I don't condone her slapping the teacher, if that teacher had taken time to build a relationship, to have empathy, to understand what was going on with the child, because to me, you could clearly see that something was happening with her, maybe she would still be with us today. And honestly, you guys, this is why I'm running Humanity Solutions right now. Like this is my goal. My goal is to help educators look at behavior in a different manner and not look at it as something personal all the time, but look at it as a cry for help. So anybody want to share? It doesn't have to be like a story to someone's demise like mine was. And I realize that that's an extreme example, but it's a very true story. I actually have a nonprofit called the Omega Education Foundation, where I work with high need schools, and that's kind of like my focus from a nonprofit because of that. So anybody have like any story that they want to share, that a personal story about a student negatively affected or positively, because I see both. I see teachers very positively affect the trajectory of a student's life, but then I've also personally experienced the opposite. Anybody? If not, I'll move forward. You can unmute if you would like to share anything. All right. So let's get into a little bit about what is trauma and how does it affect the students we teach. So trauma is any frightening, dangerous, or violent event that poses psychological harm or is a threat to a student's life or even a loved one. So we named off a few earlier, a few specific ones that students come to us with. You know, if I come as an adult, 41 years old, if I come to work tomorrow and I didn't have lights last night, or I had a fight with my husband, I'm not always my best self. So we are going to see some of those reactions, and we are going to talk about some of those reactions on a later slide. But before we move there, I want you to see this video. It's a really good video. It's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. They talk about toxic stress, which is trauma, and how it impacts the brain, the body, and the behavior. So it's about 6 minutes long. I'm going to play it now. And then after, while you're watching, if you could maybe, what are some takeaways? Like, what are some things that stood out to you as you were watching the video? And we'll share after. All right, so what did you guys think about the video? What are some takeaways that y'all have? And I'm gonna get my stuff set back up. Any takeaways? I know for me, what I took from this was the earlier you catch it, the better. We, as educators, we don't get to choose, what they bring to us. I know I was at 4th through 8th grade. So definitely by middle school, there's a lot of things going on. Middle school's real busy. And that's where I do most of my work, is middle school, because there's so much going on there at that age. Anybody else have any takeaways? Let me check the chat. Positive support is needed to turn off the traumatic response in the brain. When that does not happen, the brain cannot function in healthy ways. Absolutely. And so we have to question as educators, and I'm not sure like what everyone's role is, like if you're an administrator here or just a classroom teacher or a para, but that really doesn't matter. But we have to teach others to do the same. And especially when we're in leadership roles, like if we understand this, that, our behavior can trigger students or harm students, we have to start having some healthy conversations around that at school. We have to share that things with our colleagues, because I'm sure most of you have, stories about things that, maybe you've also done in the past. Because I know there's some things that I'm not proud of. When I first started teaching, I had to learn and grow through some things, but there's some stories, there are some things that I hear and that I see even now as a consultant that makes me cringe. But a part of my job is to get people talking about them. So I have the unique opportunity to bring some of those things to the table. Miss Lynette shared, educators can really help in this process if we step in and show some care. We truly can change their lives and their future generations. 100%. 100%. We are caretakers. Like I know that people probably hear that word and think, well, we're not the parents, and we're not the parents. But when they come to us and when they're with us from 7:30 to 3:30 every day, we are the caretakers. And what we know is that they don't always have, appropriate care at home. So when they come to us, I feel like we owe it to them. We signed up for that. That's how I feel. I feel like we've signed up to be caretakers. We can't just show up to teach. We have to be mama, daddy sometimes. We have to be counselors sometimes. So, and I personally love that side of things as a teacher. I loved being on the social emotional side of things. Miss Lynette also said it always touched my heart when they accidentally call me too, when they call me mom. Or how about when if you've been in the game for a while and you get those Facebook messages saying, thank you so much, you believed in me. Like those always like bring me back to my why and why I do this still now. All right. All right. So we talked about some of these already. You guys spit some of these out. Common causes of trauma. Poverty is the most significant and constant. Poverty is trauma in itself. Violence and death, sexual, physical, domestic abuse, neglect, absence of a caretaker, substance abuse and addiction, mental health, instability in the home, traumatic event through media, anything that undermines their safety, stability, and bonding is traumatic for them. I do want to take just a second, and hopefully you guys are in the mood for sharing here. Traumatic event through media. What do you guys like? What do you feel about that? Like, what does it make you think of? Give me something. You can unmute. I would love if you unmuted here to talk me through some of this. What do you think about when you think of traumatic events through media and like how it's affecting the kids that you currently have? And I'll start while we see if someone wants to share. But like music, y'all think about like where music is right now and how much access students have to music and how much it, affects their behavior, what they feel is normal, how they act, how they speak. Listen, I know when I was younger, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I listened to Tupac, I listened to Biggie, I listened to Bone Thugs and Harmony. I definitely did. And come to find out now, listening to the songs now as an adult, I realized I didn't even know most of the time what they were saying or what they were talking about. But you had to go out and buy the CD back then. You had to go out and buy. You had to have $20 to go and buy the CD. Now there's so much access to the music. And I think it's just I just have to say that in my opinion, it's way worse than it was back in the day. I really do. Somebody shared war photos that show violence, coverage of celebrity that reveals all the details, 100%. Yep, war photos. The music nowadays is very negative, very. And you guys do know that it's intentional, right? Like I don't want to, we can't get off into that because I won't have enough time, but you know, the music industry is intentionally putting things out there, and it's being proven and shown that there's just this cycle, you know, of and this connection between like, you know, music and incarceration, music and killing each other. So it's very, very connected. Somebody said, and all media, movies, music, TV, click on YouTube and everything is there, 100% access, very accessible. Social media is negative, very. It definitely can be, and I just try to think about how we can get away from parenting, right? Like I know my kids weren't allowed to have like Snapchat until they were like 17, a senior in high school. And I didn't want to do it then. Um, but not everybody has that monitoring. Let's see. They respond to the negativity by acting out what they're hearing. 100%. It's feeding their actions, definitely. TikTok about makeup and beauty. Yeah. And I'm guilty. I watch TikTok and I do have a lot of makeup and beauty things that spin up in mine. And it's like it just overtakes, right? Like it just kind of overtakes who they are. Oversharing by families and friends on Facebook, Instagram, 100%. And they pick up on all those habits. So definitely seeing a spike in how the media affects what we're seeing in schools and the behaviors that we have to deal with. So when thinking about combating that, right? I mean, the only way I can see is parent awareness. You know, we know they don't always show up, you know, whenever we're trying to host events and do things. But personally, I will not get on my soapbox about this, but I think we need to have some harder accountability measures for parents. That's just my own personal opinion. All right, so let's talk about some trauma responses. And the reason why trauma responses are so important is because if we can identify things as trauma responses, it's less likely that we'll take things personal. We can be more empathetic. We don't have to worry about power struggles all the time. You know, those are some things that, you know, when I speak to teachers a lot, you know, those are some of the main things. Like they go through these power struggles, they think things are always about them. And I really think that majority of the time, it's not about that person personally. It's something way deeper. So here are some things that you might see that are trauma responses. Shy and difficulty engaging with others. So it's not always an outward expression. Sometimes they're very, you know, very reserved and very shy. Excessive reactions to setbacks and unexpected changes. So think about when you're correcting them, or whenever they don't get something right, or you might be giving them some feedback about something they got wrong, but they look at it as a setback and then they have some kind of negative reactions to that. Trouble managing strong emotions, extreme anger, excessive crying, physical and verbal aggression. We see that a lot. Clinginess. It might be clinginess to you or clinginess to their peers. Difficulty transitioning, going from subject to subject, teacher to teacher, class to lunch. Sometimes that can be difficult. Forgetful, difficulty focusing. I know for me personally, if I have some personal things going on, it's very hard for me to just focus, and I am forgetful during those times. So imagine being in constant turmoil where you kind of live in a setting that's in constant trauma. You know, 5 minutes ago, I told you the directions for the assignment, and you're already asking me what to do. And I have to be honest, I'm guilty of that sometimes. Sometimes I'm very forgetful. Lack of safety awareness, like they don't understand why they shouldn't do certain things, why certain things are a danger. Missed deadlines, of course, turning in work late, poor academic performance, lack of effort and motivation, which is a big one that teachers talk about. Students aren't motivated to learn and they don't put in any effort to learn. That's very, very hard. It's a very hot topic whenever I do professional developments for schools, and I get it. But I think we oftentimes lend it and say kids are being lazy in that moment. It's not always laziness. Like I have to start watching how I say things and what I say and what words I'm feeding into them. So instead of saying you're being lazy, we need to try some different language there. And one, try to understand why the lack of effort and motivation is there too. But what if the lack of effort and motivation isn't there because my class is boring? Like, what if I'm slapping a packet on the desk and saying, hey, here, do this, and there's no engagement, there's no student to student engagement, there's no teacher to student engagement? Sometimes we have to be reflective on ourselves and how we're presenting the material as well. Being a perfectionist, I've seen that as well. Like students who they can't get one wrong, they get upset if they miss something or if they don't have all A's. Like that's also another trauma response. All right, so now let's get into like maybe looking at things different and what can we do? Like, what can we do? How can we create this safe space? How can we get to the nitty-gritty of the problem? How can we dig in with students so we can start impacting them in a different way? So voice, value, and validate. Let's define those. So voice is an opinion or attitude expressed, right? Value, consider someone or their opinion to be important. That's important for people. Validation, affirmation that a person, their feelings or opinions are valid. So let's look at those one more time. Voice is an opinion or attitude expressed, what you say. Value is considering someone or their opinion to be important. And validation, affirmation that a person, their feelings or opinions are valid. And that can be hard sometimes, and you have to be intentional whenever you're looking at that. All right, so let's unpack those three just a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. All right, let's unpack voice. How do we create that? Well, we have to create a safe space for students to share and talk. And I think we kind of talked about that earlier. Trust is a big thing. How do we create a safe space? What are some things that we can do to create that space? Well, one, we have to be aware that the space is needed. Okay. And we open it up for them. We have to actively listen. It's easy to passively listen, but active listening means I'm present, I'm there, I'm hearing you, and I'm considering what you're saying. You also have to consider your tone, volume, and intent. If you're condescending, if you have a heightened tone, if you make them feel like what they're saying is wrong, it can affect the conversation in a positive or negative way, right? Like, so how I respond is super important. So one of the biggest things that when we talk about, creating a space for voice, and having conversations around behavior with students, time is always a factor. Like people always say, I don't have time, I'm busy, when can I do this? Well, you have to kind of make time for it and you have to set some things up for them. So if you are interested in like setting up a procedure or a process in your classroom, I wish my teacher knew. If you Google that or go to on it's on YouTube. If you put it in on YouTube, I wish my teacher knew. It's an amazing video with students who've compiled things that they wish their teacher knew. So I always make a recommendation for I wish my teacher knew box. Okay. And it's a shoebox. I put a little slit in it. I have a paper and a pencil next to it. And if a student just needs to release in the moment, because sometimes we do, we could be teaching, we could be having the best lesson of our lives, but there's two students in the back having an issue. And there's the big push for bell to bell teaching, and we don't always have time to stop. If it's not something urgent, I would have my students jot down really quick, because you can say, okay, we're losing instruction time, but they weren't listening to you anyway if they're dealing with something else and they just have something going on that they feel is pressing. Because remember, whether we feel it's pressing or not, that doesn't matter. It's pressing to them. Perception is reality. So you can create some type of safe space, a box, somewhere they can vent, talk, put their idea down, tell you, what they need. And then when you have time, it could be during independent time while they're working. It could be recess, PE. You have a second, come sit with me at lunch, and you can help address and tend to the need. But you have to create the space. I always like direct talking, but students always feel like everything is urgent. So the box was there for me to say, okay, I don't forget. It's written. I can read it. And then when I have time, you and I can have a conversation. Let's talk about the value piece. Let's unpack that. So in helping to place value on what someone says when you may not think it's a value, it may not be a value of you. Well, first you have to put yourself in their shoes of wanting to be valued. How do you feel when your opinion isn't valued? Like, think about if you were talking to your boss, or you were talking to your significant other or family member or friend, and you can always tell when they don't value, when they're being dismissive, when they're being condescending. So put yourself in that state. Like, think about how that makes you feel. And when you're talking to your students about something important to them, it's important for them to feel valued when they're talking. You have to be open-minded and remember what they are sharing is important to them. As I stated, perception is reality. Appreciate differences about them. Their way of communicating or using words or saying words or the way they make eye contact or not could be different. That varies from household to household. So appreciate their difference and don't look at it as a threat or as disrespect all the time. And remember that your language is important, like the words you use. Are you building confidence in the moment? Or are you helping them to be resilient in a moment when they're feeling like they can't do something? Like, we always have to be mindful of our language. Validation. Well, first and foremost with validation is not to judge. Sometimes it's hard not to, and especially if you're talking to a student that is a repeat offender and they're always, doing something all the time. It's important for us to look at each situation separately. Don't judge, confirm their feelings about it, because they have feelings about it. Ask questions to get to the root cause. Like, ask as many questions as you can to understand what the true issue is. Paraphrasing what they've said is important. And I think somebody had talked about that in the chat earlier. Like, what I think I'm hearing you say is this, is also a way to validate what someone's saying. Connect by sharing your own experience, building that relationship piece, super important. Building trust and saying, oh, well, Miss Grace, she also, man, she went through this too. So now I can open up and talk to her about it because I feel like we have something in common. Ask them what they need to be successful. Like, I know as teachers, we're always problem solvers and we always want to solve every problem. But let's start like including them in that so they can take ownership for that. Like, what do you need to be successful? What does that look like? All right, so here's just a few tips for achieving the 3 V's: voice, value, and validate. Just a few things to remember as you're going through the process of managing classrooms, dealing with all the trauma that students come to us with every day. Take yourself out of the equation. It's very hard for us not to take things personal sometimes. It's a huge problem in education sometimes. The student isn't the problem is the problem. That is my mantra. The student isn't the problem is the problem. And that helps me when I can disconnect that student from the behavior. It helps me to be more empathetic. It helps me not to get into a power struggle, and it helps me not to take things personal. Allow students time to de-escalate. We talked about those ways that students like to de-escalate. Let's not be so quick to, oh, you put your head down, that's disrespectful, I'm writing you up. Oh, you walked out of my room and you're standing in the hall. Now, if they walk out the room and jump a fence and go across the road, okay, We know we need to set a plan in motion right here because we have a runner. But if the student literally just walks out and stands outside to breathe and gather, can we not look at that and write them up? Like, we need to do better with that, because all the write-up does is escalates the situation even more. Listen and empathize. And that doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. That does not mean that at all. But listening and empathizing can help you help them solve the problem in a more meaningful way. Consider your tone and volume. That is super important in having the student be comfortable. Remember, you want to place value and you want to validate what they're saying, but I don't want to fuss. Every situation doesn't require me fussing at them. Like, I want to make sure that I am considering your feelings and listening. Recommend calming techniques. Deep breathing. Somebody talked about that one earlier. What are some other calming techniques? You can ask them, what is something you do when you get upset? You know, they may not be able to do everything, because I know I like to listen to music when I get upset, but I have seen a teacher have an iPad and some headphones and have some calming music. Now, they couldn't pick their music. They couldn't put on Cardi B or Nicki Minaj, but they could go to the calming station and they could listen to something relaxing. Some Mozart, something that's gonna feed them frequencies and make them calm for real. Avoid power struggles. I know it's hard because I know we are the authority figure in the room, and I completely understand that. I get it. But there's a time and a place, and you can still keep your power and handle the situation when the timing is right. Avoid questions until the student is when they're in a heightened state. I think I worded that wrong, but when they are really, really up and really need to de-escalate, let them de-escalate before we handle or address the situation. Ask questions to get to the root cause. We said that already. Always go into problem solve mode, but remember to ask them what they need to be successful. Teach, teach, teach. Confidence, resilience, and reframe. Teach, teach, teach means I have to always be in teach mode, model mode. I have to model the behavior I want to see. And sometimes that requires us to practice some things. It could be whole class. It could be one-on-one. I might sit you and say, hey, watch this video for 10 minutes on conflict resolution and let's talk about it. Like, I have to give them what they need. And also, you have to remember to look for growth over perfection. Like, I have to look for the little spaces. I don't know if you guys know Rita Pearson or have seen her champion video, but she stresses in there. She talks about a scenario where the kid got 18 wrong and 2 right. And when the student came to her, the student said, is this an F? And he was like, yeah. And she was like, well, why you got this like a +2? Well, -18 sucks the life out, but +2 says you're not all bad. And I want to build confidence always. So always look for spaces for growth over perfection. All right. So you can't truly be present for students if you don't take care of yourself first, right? So the resource that I provided for you is a goal setting sheet. It's a sheet where you kind of sit, think about what you need as a teacher, where you want to go. It kind of helps you to think through and set some goals for yourself. Now, I know we're getting into Christmas break right here, but in January, it's a great time to reset. It's a great time to start thinking through some things you want to look different. So the resource goes through a series of questions, just asking what's going well, thinking about what's going well and where you want to go. So you have that available to you. I also want to give you some contact information for me. If I can stop sharing this part. All right, let's see. All right, so these are some of the things that I offer. I do school solutions where I come into the schools and provide professional development on restorative practices. I have several that I do, but the biggest thing that I do is the restorative practices, like helping your school implement those instead of zero tolerance policies. And I do ongoing support. I do private professional development. Like if you just wanted to do something outside just for your school or a certain grade level, or let's just say a group of teachers wanted to get together to say, come in and learn some things. I do those as well. Student leadership groups, my daughter runs that, where we have, we invite kids to come. We talk about, issues in schools and we problem solve. And I also have a podcast that just started up, Gray Area Conversations. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. So I'm excited about that as well. If you would like to be a guest, we will have some education topics. It's not just education topics for the podcast, but there'll be moments and opportunities for that as well. Contact information is here. KarenMoore.educator@gmail, and my phone number. You can text, you can call. I'll be happy to send information if you shoot me an email. And thank you guys so much. I enjoyed this so much. Thank you for being so engaged and sharing with me.
Thank you so much. A lot of the audience has already done the evaluation, and they keep saying, we love the mantra, we love the mantra, we love the mantra. And I have to say so too. I really love that you went from broad to what can I do right now? So, I mean, some webinars just stick to the broad, some just stick to the what do you do. So to get all of it together is really, really awesome. And I know S. Lopez asked us the podcast again. It's on the screen, Gray Area Conversations podcast. But thank you so much. This was really awesome to not only learn new information, but also be self-reflective of what are we doing right now and what can we do better. So thank you so much again.
Oh, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.